Hello and welcome. We are here today to talk about fraud awareness and bring it to the attention of the board at First Presbyterian Church in Billings, Montana. We'll cover a basic overview of the church's operations, how money flows through the church, what leads people to commit fraud, what specific frauds that FPC is most vulnerable to, as well as prevention and detection techniques to try and mitigate the risk within the organization. We hope that you find this very helpful and want to bring the awareness of fraud to your attention in order to help FPC and their mission within the community. So let's jump right in. In order to better understand the potential for fraud, the amount of fraud that could exist, and who has opportunities to commit this fraud, it's important to look at the overview of FPC. FPC has a small number of employees with only one being full-time, which is Pastor Dave. There are also other employees within the organization, which include a secretary who is three-quarter time, musicians who are part-time, a custodian who's part-time, and perhaps even a specialized lawn care technician could make the list. Current membership within the church is 360 members. Average yearly income and expenses total $520,000. As of January through October of 2022, actual income is $390,000 and actual expenses is $478,000. Currently, FPC has around $1 million in liquid assets. Total cash, money market funds, CDs, and endowments amount to around $4 million. This church has lots of yearly cash donations, as well as a lot of accumulated assets, which creates opportunity for fraud to be committed within the organization. To get a better understanding of how cash flows through the church, let's take a deeper dive into this area. Let's now take a look at how money flows through the organization. FPC generates donations from people which fund their operations and mission. Donations come into the church by two different avenues. The first being online giving, where people can give donations to the church on an online giving app. They can make recurring donations as well as one-time donations through this platform. This platform accepts credit cards, debit cards, or you can also link it to your bank account. The other main avenue for donations to enter the church is through in-person giving. This is typically collected as offering during Sunday morning service. This comes in the form of cash and/or check. And the presence of cash and check create a great opportunity to commit fraud. We'll touch on that in just a bit. After the offering is collected, it's counted and recorded by two volunteers of the church who then deposit it into a safe. The money is then given to the secretary, and the secretary counts the money, records it, and deposits it to the bank. As you can see here, in-person giving gives a lot more gateways to commit fraud within the organization because it goes through lots of hands, whereas online giving is directly tied to the church's bank accounts. In order to make withdrawals and distribute this money, it first must be approved by a committee within the church. And these funds go to many different areas within the church, including building and upkeep, which is about 30% of the yearly budget, staff salary, which is about 30%, mission work such as community food drives and donations to other nonprofits, which is about 20%, and finally programs within the church such as youth group or Stephen ministry, which is about 20% of the yearly budget. This gives a great insight into the operations of the church, which will show us where fraud is most likely to occur and which fraud specifically has a great opportunity to occur. I will now hand it over to take you through what leads to fraudulent behavior.
Thanks, John. I'm Bryce Legary, and we're going to be talking about the characteristics of people who commit fraud. The fraud triangle has three parts to it: pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. Pressure can come from a personal financial crisis, like the need to afford payments for your house, your car, just basic care for your family, or it could be the individual lives a very lavish lifestyle. Opportunities often come from a lack of segregation of duties, lack of internal controls, as well as the ability and knowledge to carry out the fraud. Segregation of duties is very hard to maintain with so few employees. Rationalization is the process that the person committing fraud uses to justify why they are committing this fraud. Rationalization can come from your family needs this money, you need the money to make payments on your house or your vehicles. Another rationalization would be the fraudster saying that this is only a loan and I'm going to pay it back when I get my next paycheck or over my next 4 paychecks. Now we're going to be talking about these specific identified fraud risks, and we'll discuss skimming, cash larceny, bid rigging, shell company schemes or fake invoices, and expense reimbursement and how these affect the church. Skimming is the theft of cash before it is entered into the accounting system. The highest opportunity area would be from the collection basket. As John said, cash moves hands a few times before it is entered into the system and deposited into the bank. A way to prevent this would be require 2 individuals to count the money and record the amount. This is something FPC already does and is good practice to continue, and this will help prevent skimming. Cash larceny is intentionally taking an employer's cash without consent and against the employer's will. One of the areas of opportunity would be the bank deposit slips. The fraudster could take the cash out of the deposit bag on the way to the bank. There are several ways to catch this. A few of them are proper segregation of duties and noticing discrepancies between cash recorded in your system and the cash deposited per the bank statement. These are only a couple of ways to help prevent and detect cash larceny, but they are fairly effective. Now I will hand it over to Bailey as he talks about bid rigging and shell company schemes. Thank you.
Another scheme that could occur within FPC is bid rigging. Bid rigging, in comparison to the other schemes we have already talked about and will talk about, can be tricky to detect. Bid rigging is an illegal act in which competing parties collude to determine the winner of the bidding process. Where I see this as an issue within FPC relates to additions within the church. Let's take, for example, the new roof that was just put on. An appropriate way to go about adding a new roof would be to go out and get bids from a variety of construction companies to find the best deal with the best quality. The goal of the church, though, is to support its members. One of the members of the church might own a construction company. Instead of going out and receiving bids for the new roof, you decide to use his company because he is a member of the church. He might not have the best reputation or the lowest price, but since he is a member, you go with his company. This is a spin-off of bid rigging, but is a real-life example of how it would occur within the church. Shell companies are another scheme that could ruin FPC. A shell company is a fake entity for the sole purpose of committing fraud. Areas in which I believe a shell company could occur are ordering goods, printing services, as well as the flowers bought for Sunday Mass. The secretary within FPC has all the power. She is responsible for a lot of services within the company. She could make a fake flowers company and use that company as the middleman. For example, the church needs flowers for Sunday Mass. She would go and buy with her own money flowers from a company that is credible under the new company that was created. From there, she would go into the church's records and say the church bought them from the fake company she created for more than she actually paid. She would then pocket the difference. In order to prevent something like this, the most important thing you need is segregation of duties. With the secretary doing a lot of the work, things like shell companies could easily happen. I am now going to pass it off to Phil, and he will talk about expense reimbursement schemes.
My name is Philip, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about expense reimbursement schemes and how they could affect FPC. An expense reimbursement scheme is where an employee makes a purchase on behalf of an organization, adds fake items to the receipts or inflates amounts on the receipt, and turns it into the organization in order to get reimbursed beyond what they spent. Expense reimbursement frauds are a very common type of occupational fraud. Unfortunately, it can also be very difficult to detect this type of fraud. There are 4 common types of expense reimbursements. These are mischaracterized expenses, overstated expenses, fictitious expenses, and multiple expenses. A mischaracterized expense is when someone within the organization submits personal expense reports, such as receipts, through the organization in order to get reimbursed for those purchases. Overstated expenses is when the person submitting the receipt alters the receipt in order to make it look like their expense was higher than it really was. Ways this can be done is by changing numbers into bigger numbers that look alike and submitting them, or if the employee hangs onto the receipt for a while, they might scan the receipt into the computer and use some sort of photo altering program to change the numbers before they submit it for reimbursement. It is important to require receipts be submitted promptly, along with requiring an original copy of the receipt be turned in. Another form of expense reimbursement scheme is fictitious expenses. This one's pretty self-explanatory. The employee creates a fake expense report, submits it, and gets reimbursed. Once again, close inspection of the receipts, along with requiring original copies, can help prevent this type of bogus expense reimbursement. Lastly, there's a type of expense reimbursement scheme called multiple expense reimbursements. This type involves the employee turning in the same expense report multiple times to get reimbursed for the same thing. This is a less common type of expense reimbursement fraud, but nonetheless, it's still something to watch out for. A major opportunity area for someone within the church to commit any of these types of frauds would be when the church holds events. If someone is in charge of going out and purchasing groceries or snacks or whatever, they may choose to purchase their own groceries at the same time and submit the entire receipt for reimbursement. Even if the individual isn't dishonest enough to put their entire grocery bill on there, they may purchase a personal item here and there and include it in the reimbursement. Over a long period of time, these personal expenses add up and get costly for the church, and can hurt them in the long run. Now I'm going to pass it over to Baxter, who's going to wrap things up.
All right, thanks, Bill, for that analysis. So here's some actions to prevent and detect fraud. Great way to prevent and detect fraud is to require your employees to take vacations. Requiring employees to take mandatory vacations is a great and simple way to reduce fraud risk. Committing fraud takes a lot of effort to conceal, and if employees are not able to physically be present to conceal the fraud, it makes it much easier to detect this fraud happening. Another way, even though it might be difficult in the church, is to require the separation of duties. Certain tasks should always be performed by more than one person. Usually these tasks involve the handling of cash. Anytime you're recording or collecting cash, you're going to want to keep those two jobs separate so somebody can't just take the cash and record the amount for the difference that they took. Anytime somebody is also recording cash and depositing that to a bank, you're going to want to keep those two jobs separate too. Data analytics can be used as a way to detect fraud. Some simple analytics you can run are things like average Sunday collections, average weekly donations, average expense reimbursements. This kind of goes back to requiring vacations too. If you require employees to take mandatory vacations, when you run these data analytics when they're gone, if you see a drastic change in these ratios, it could be an indicator that fraud could be occurring. Related party donations, anytime you're making a donation to a related party, you're going to want to make sure that goes through the mandatory approval process. So you're going to want to have a process in place for any time donations go out of the church. Lockboxes can be used for people handing donations in after hours, things like that. You're not just want to have anybody have access to those lockboxes, and you may even want to have two different people have to be present to open that. So somebody can't just go open the lockbox and take cash out. And finally, donation receipts. If you give donation receipts when people donate, it makes it harder for somebody to conceal that the donation never happened, because if the person giving the donation also gets a receipt, and then you ask them, hey, how much did you donate? They can show you the receipt, and you have a record that's not within the church that could be removed or concealed, showing how much was actually donated. At this time, we'd like to thank the First Presbyterian Church for letting us come in and do this analysis of fraud risk within their church. We'd like to open it up for any questions that you may have. I'm sure you have a lot, and we'd be happy to answer those. Thank you.